For our Scheme programs, we're going to be using DrRacket, which is an IDE that lets us both edit and run Scheme programs. So let's see how we get that installed. The first thing we're going to do is go to the Racket homepage. So we'll bring up a browser window and we'll go to racketlang, racket-lang.org. And then we're going to download Racket. You can see that there's Windows, Linux, Mac, and Unix source versions that you can download. The version you want should come up by default. So we'll click on that to download it. And now that it's downloaded, we'll open the file to run it, and this will start the installer. So for the most part, the defaults should be sufficient, and it can take a while for this install to complete, so just be patient. Eventually it will get there. And once the installation is complete, click Finish. Then in your Start menu, if you're using Windows, you should have a folder for Racket. And what we want to use is DrRacket, not just plain Racket. DrRacket is the IDE that has everything that we're looking for, and it'll take a moment for that to load. And then once it does, we want to go ahead and set up a default language, and you'll notice it actually tells you how to do that here. So in Language, choose Language, and click on the Racket language initially. That'll open up the Show Details option. And then here you'll see under Automatic Lang Line, there's the option to always use the same #lang line. And for that, we'll say #lang scheme. And you want to make sure you do that so that you're guaranteed that you're going to be using the Scheme language. You can see here that DrRacket has a lot of different languages built in. Most of them are very similar to Scheme itself, but this will just ensure that the language constructs you're using are the best from Scheme. So unfortunately here, it doesn't have that default set yet. So I could type #lang scheme here just to make sure that it works. Just to test that everything's okay, I'll say define A to be 10, define X to be 3, and then plus AX. And when I run this code, it should return 13. So that looks good. Let's close DrRacket and let's go ahead and save this file. And I'll save it on the desktop. And I'll call it first.scm. And then the type I want to save as any. And that's just so that I can use the SCM extension. And now I am sure I want to exit. I'll close my browser. And you'll see that I have first.scheme on my desktop. And of course, on your computer, you'd want to save it to wherever it is that you save your schoolwork. And if I double click on this, that will bring up DrRacket. And it'll load the program, and I can click Run to run the code. And then if I want to create a new document, notice now because I set my default language earlier, I see that the default language is Scheme. So that's a quick run through of how to set up DrRacket. And at this point, we're ready to get started programming in Scheme.